Thank you.
Madam President of the European Commission, we face one of the biggest health crises now, and I'm quite convinced that a coordinated European response was and remains the best approach. We have a responsibility to avoid and avert a situation whereby you have 27 countries competing in a bidding war for vaccines. And when faced with this, we have a real transparency and confidence crisis that we must counter. Of course, we do understand that some elements of the contracts concluded between the pharmaceuticals and the European Commission contain confidential information and trade secrets. However, there needs to be full transparency when it comes to the quantities purchased, the delivery schedule until now and in the future. There are many questions being asked right now. Why are these doses not arriving? Where are they? We need to be able to answer these questions if we want there to be credibility. We must publish urgently now a detailed schedule of the deliveries of doses from pharmaceuticals to each member state. We must mobilize our production capacity now so that we can speed up and step up vaccine production in Europe in order to allow us to attain herd immunity within Europe. And we must also put an end to the psychological suffering of young people and teenagers who are suffering a great deal right now. Member states must act. It's about our future.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes, Kathleen Van Brent next.
Mevrouw de commissievoorzitter, u weet dat ik België...
Madam President, Commission President, I'm from Belgium, and I'm actually relieved that in Belgium, and thank you to the European approach, your approach, we have relatively enough vaccines at the same condition and the same price. That's very good. That doesn't mean, however, that one couldn't have done it all better. At the beginning of the negotiations, when the contracts had been more transparent, then perhaps a lot of things could be avoided. It's the case now that with the export measures, that was really a pity because we're using too much energy on that, criticizing that situation. If not careful, then we could suddenly end up with less production instead of more. And we can see how the Russians and Chinese are spreading their vaccines throughout the world. And we can't simply point to COVAX. Rather, we need a broader responsibility in global terms. We don't yet have a surplus of vaccines, but we can ensure that it's produced everywhere. You can produce it in Europe and Africa, but the patents belong to us, and I think it's really not acceptable, Madam Chair. I think we have to thank.
Vice President Sharantsova.
Paní místopředsedkyně, paní předsedkyně.
Chairman, thank you. You said that vaccination is a marathon and that it's the very beginning of it all, and it's true. It's race against time, race to save lives, and we're not winning yet, that's for sure. And I have to say that there is a plus here for purchase, but minus for communication, transparency, and speed. Moderna will arrive to the Czech Republic 1 week later, and the number of doses is actually only half the volume that was previewed. And that's what the Czech people are reading now in the newspapers, even though Europe is now the biggest manufacturer. 3/4 of vaccines come from Europe. So please, let's start. We need a sprint race now. Let's start up the manufacturing lines. We have to win this race. We do.
Al minuta u nofs Jordan Bardella.
Jordan Bardella.
Thank you, Madam President. Since the beginning of the health crisis, European technocracy has been completely incompetent and failed on ordering masks, ordering tests, protecting borders. The European Commission was supposed to also manage vaccines and has the right competences to do so, but the problem is it persisted. Now, you carried out negotiations, and that has meant that people do not believe in one of the major exit doors to this crisis. Meanwhile, the UK has been able to vaccinate more than 10 million people. Hungary has decided to go beyond what you have told them to do and to order the Russian vaccine, Russian vaccine that you decided to ignore for sad ideological reasons. Every single minute that we are behind because of Brussels is a minute that means that we're going to have huge human and social consequences. Too frequently, your union that has caused such weakness, this period means that we have to really question your big political and economic guidelines. We know that this is deplorable, and currently, for too long, you have to give back to the nations the powers that they need if you want to be able to achieve anything.
Thank you. Next is Rasmus Andresen for 1 minute. Thank you.
A global pandemic demands a global response. Only 73 out of 195 countries have started the COVID vaccination. This is not good enough. Only the richest countries have access to the COVID vaccines. Instead of protecting the interests of pharmaceutical companies, we need to protect all people. Healthcare should be a global human right. Dear European Commission, dear national governments, don't block the patent waiver. Share intellectual property rights and support compulsory licenses. Auch in der EU sind die Baustellen.
And in the EU, there's really some hindrances. This objective of having 60% vaccinated by March, we're not going to do this alone. And right now, Madam President, you need to give us a concrete plan. Just hoping on the producers isn't sufficient. We have to use all of our production capacities. We have to use the full budget. And we can't make any more mistakes, and we need transparent plans for you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Madam Zizniewska.
Pani Przewodnicząca.
President, Minister, and President of the Commission, dear ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has brought the whole world to a halt. Member States took a joint decision to proceed to joint purchase, and this was organised. The decision for this is in the hands of the Commission, the President of the Commission, the responsibility for it. So how did this happen? How did we move to this joint purchase of vaccinations? First of all, of course, there was the discovery of the vaccination. Then the next step was contracts signed with pharmaceutical companies, and this is where the problem started, when perhaps the Commission decided to conclude these contracts a little too late, and they didn't manage to guarantee sufficient deliveries. And now, the President of the Commission, you have addressed the hemicycle and said that everything is going to be okay and long live Europe. But unfortunately, at the moment, it's not long live Europe. Rather than learning from the mistakes, because we've now got the third wave of the pandemic, what we need is a transparent system to order the vaccinations and deliver them, and this would not.
Thank you. Next for 1 minute is Marisa Matias.
Thank you very much. As Antonio Guterres said, the vaccine is a success for science and a failure for solidarity. A monopoly has meant that there is a global imbalance. Just a few months ago, this was the biggest hope for the EU, and it's clearly becoming the quickest and worst failure. Now, science was able to be up to the task, and we know this, but we have to look at the words of April of 2020, that vaccines, we said, were going to be a common and universal good, Ms. von der Leyen. Now, vaccines, of course, are something that the citizens need, but they don't understand why it's all in the hands of private companies and completely managed by big pharma, including all of the liability is public and all of the profits are private. So we have discussed this from the very beginning, from the very outset, and the Commission ignored this. Some 2 million people more have died, and the statistics just keep going up. We have to save lives and not.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Vice President Eva Kopacz.
Yes, thank you very much, President. Information about the rollout of the vaccinations against the COVID-19 virus triggered a wide range of emotions. Above all, hope that this meant the end of the pandemic and a return to normality. Unfortunately, as weeks passed, we have seen that there have been problems with deliveries of the vaccinations, which has led to a disruption not only of the work of the different medical centres, but also has triggered a lot of stress amongst patients who have been registered for vaccinations. And this is even more acute a problem because we're talking about older citizens who really need to be treated a lot better. Older people are not just names written down on a list in a table for the vaccination, but these are human beings. Very often they need help. They need the help of their nearest and dearest. So this disruption has led to a kind of domino effect. We should not forget that the virus does not respect borders, nationalities, nor does it respect national egoisms and specific interests of the global corporations. And this is why I would like to appeal to the European leaders and manufacturers of vaccinations. We have a very powerful tool now in the form of a vaccination, and it's up to us now. We have to assume a responsibility, a joint responsibility, which will allow us to when and how we can end this pandemic. And in order to save people's lives, it's not just enough to come up with a vaccine. We have to overcome the disease. And I would like to call upon the Commission to very strictly apply the provisions relating to the vaccinations and also have a very detailed analysis of why there has been.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, for 1.5 minutes, it's Eero Hein-Aluma.
Madam President, it is a fact that we're in a race with time concerning the vaccines, and it is very important that the vaccines are delivered as promised and that the vaccines arrive quickly for our citizens. The new British mutation and other variants become a greater danger to us, and it could happen, then they could spread even further. And this is a huge problem for health and our citizens. So, for that reason, the Commission has to do everything in its power in order to speed up the production. I am not satisfied that the Parliament has not received sufficient information on the contracts with the pharmaceutical companies. We need transparency. We need more transparency. And Finland, we have received 1/2 of the promised amount of vaccinations. It's not acceptable for us nor for other countries. And we expect that the Commissioner will investigate how we can review the questions of patent protection and the contracts, and perhaps we could look at license production as a solution in order to ensure more production and deliveries. We have to take every possible step and investigate every way in order to get the vaccine.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Vice President Nicolas Bier.
President, finally, we've been looking forward in the European Parliament to this exchange of views with you, and it's been postponed for far too long. You, more than anybody else, are responsible as a representative for the Commission, the European Union. There's a lot of damage here for the image of the European Union and our citizens. We now have to gather up the pieces and try and put all of this together, and this is valuable time that could have been put to better use. All of us believe in Europe and European Union, so we need full transparency, because the truth always comes to light. It's not the time for sweeping statements. In a crisis, you have to lead, and this means that you have to do so with credible examples and not always be catching up. Thierry Breton has shown us how to do this. Make the most of possibilities, recognize mutants, mutations and variants, and continue to develop vaccines, and then have a regular exchange within the European Union. Why is what working where, and how is it working the best? This is what we need as a kind of public strategy, and this is what we owe to our citizens in Europe.
Thank you. Anna Cavazzini for 1 minute is next.
Dear Commission President, let me be very clear. I really support and defend the common European approach on vaccines. It is really good that we do not have a harmful race between the different EU member states on who gets the vaccine first. But the EU strategy is really turning a blind eye to the global dimension. COVAX and the WHO patent pool do not deliver in securing a fair distribution of the vaccine around the globe. When the smallest part of the world's population secured the biggest share of the vaccine doses, something is going wrong. We need to increase the production capacity. You said it yourself, but that means that also countries like India and South Africa need to be enabled to produce the vaccine. And the EU must use its leverage to get the pharma companies to share their technology and know-how with developing countries. We can only win against COVID if we act together, and we have to act now.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. For 1 minute, our colleague Kuzmiuk is next.
So, immer diese 1 Minuten reden. Man kann da wirklich überhaupt nichts sagen.
President, it was an extremely good decision to have a joint strategy for purchasing vaccinations for 27 member states, but unfortunately it's been undermined by mistakes made by the Commission. And the rate of vaccination is very low. It's lower than that of Israel, the United Kingdom and the United States. So how is it possible that the Commission has given its support in the €3 billion to the pharmaceutical companies? And there is this problem with and then what about the third countries? How is it possible that you, President of the Commission, are guaranteeing that we have these contracts that have been signed and we're going to get deliveries by a certain deadline, but then, of course, the vaccines don't actually arrive. There's a delay and there's no reaction on the part of the Commission. Without a significant increase in the manufacture of vaccines and speeding up deliveries, then the European Union strategy of wanting to vaccinate 70% by autumn is going to lie in pieces. Only 15%.
Thank you. Traian Bazescu for 1.5 minutes is next.
Bin ja froh, dass ich überhaupt hier bin. So, ich muss mal gucken, wie wir das machen mit...
Excuse me, but the interpreters like to point out there's a problem because somebody's microphone in one of the liaison offices is obviously still on. Now it seems to have gone off.
European citizens have gained equal access to the vaccines. The responsibility for this delay, which costs human lives, lays with the big pharma industry. They were the first to get the money, but the latest and the last to observe the contractual clauses. Although they have huge profits, they refuse to give up their intellectual property rights. Madam President, such a process would allow a lot of states to produce their own vaccines if Big Pharma gave up the intellectual property rights. As I have previously said, global companies tend to act more and more based on their own rules and not based on the laws of the states where they gain huge profits. It is therefore essential that in future, within G20 and the World Trade Organization, we should talk about a way of shaping globalization, which, at least in the case of Big Pharma, is starting to become inhuman, directed only towards profit and with a minimum of responsibility for human lives. Thank you.
Grazie is Simon.
Thank you. Next is Nick.
Thank you, Nicholas Gonzalez-Cazares, for a minute and a half.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. Madam President, Socialists support this vaccination strategy because it takes a step along the path of solidarity in Europe. And there were excellent objectives to bring the vaccine to millions without any distinction. And we are on the way there. It strengthens democracy. Now, criticizing the mistakes that were made is not criticizing the Union. We are defending our institutions. We consider vaccines to be a common good. Science, in less than a year, has achieved something that seemed impossible. We have supported the pharmaceutical industry that is so crucial in fighting this pandemic. Now, we are demanding that we are able to achieve our objective, to return to confidence. Now, President, you need to do everything possible to make sure that we can get past this bottleneck, and a liberalization of licenses could assist us in achieving our objectives. But we have to make sure that industry is with us too, and we need to consider this. The EU would not accept any vaccine propaganda. All vaccines must be approved by EMA. We have seen that families, friends, hospitals, and health are all brought to their knees. They are carrying out a mammoth battle. This strategy is our hope, and it is an enormous challenge, an historic one, and I am sure that it will mark the future of Europe. Let us do it together and united. Thank you.
Thank you. Niels Torvalds, 1 minute.
Madam President of the Commission, we had some frank exchange of views earlier, so I think it's time for conclusions and not for being too angry. And the conclusions could be actually sung by, what did you learn in school today? What did you learn in EU today, dear little Commission of mine? One, we need to have had the Parliament with us from the very beginning, and the contact group is a very good step in that direction. Two, when we spend that amount of money we are now going to spend, then we need an open source approach. And when Linux started to do open source, the big companies came against, among other persons, my son. And then today they have learned that open source was something which was actually in their interest also, and in the interest of mankind. And third, we need a European law on transparency. And when this is coming from the Commission, I'm going to say that, yes, we did it. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Catherine Langen-Siepen, 1 minute.
Sehr geehrte
Madam von der Leyen, many who are at home and they've had to organize care for those who are living with them, and the availability of vaccines, of course, have to go to the most vulnerable, and that's correct. But what about people who have ALS or people who have to take care of children who have chronic lung illnesses? There are 18 million people in Europe who have disabilities, and they don't all live in institutions, and their need is enormous. Our debate should not be involving competition among different groups in our society. Rather, we should be focusing on more production and more vaccines and transparency in these contracts between. It's correct to have this, and of course we're also debating the different strategies. But of course these all have to be cleared up. But it's the wrong time. Playing a political blame game doesn't produce any vaccines. So those of us who have influence have to ensure that we can't just argue about what was done wrong. Rather, right now we have to join our forces and focus on getting more vaccines.
Carlo Fidanza, 1 minute.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. President von der Leyen, it is true. If you do nothing, you can't make a mistake. But then if someone makes a mistake, that individual must take their responsibility. And specifically when we're talking about the health of hundreds of millions of people. And we are saying that with the very calm conscience of those who believed that in a vaccination campaign, the EU would show its added value by making sure that there would be an avoidance of hoarding of vaccine doses and high prices. But the Commission made two mistakes. They had unclear provisions in the contracts with the pharmaceutical companies, and they also showed that they have a weak geopolitical position. Here we are in a contradiction. On the one hand, we're trying to find a way to remediate this through some sort of a strange vaccine nationalism, and then meanwhile trying to control any vaccines outside. Now, we've seen that 70% of the European population vaccinated by the summer seems like a pipe dream. But let's see, President, I will conclude. Before asking for more competence in the area of health for the EU should be able to do what it can do already well. And thank you.
Next speaker, Angelika Niebler.
Yes, thank you very much, President, Representative of the Council, President of the Commission. First of all, dear President of the Commission, thank you very much for your very honest analysis of where we are at when it comes to tackling the pandemic and the next steps that have to be taken. Last year there was at the end of last year, we were very euphoric. In record time, we had managed to produce not just one but several vaccinations. But when it comes to mass production of these vaccines, we have seen that over the past few weeks we've been overtaken by reality. Vaccines are not actually all that easily manufactured, and you can't just fill bottles with them like you do mineral water. We're talking about production and transport of millions of doses of vaccines, and it's a highly complex process. And the production processes and capabilities that depend on very many factors, including external factors, and these issues have been addressed. The fight against COVID-19 is far from having been won, and we have to focus on what we have to do next. And I think it's quite right, Madam President, that we have to now tackle mutants, the different variants of the virus. That's very important. And I think it's equally important that we develop a therapy strategy, treatment strategy, because, of course, there are those who suffer very seriously from COVID-19, and we have to see how we can better support them with pharmaceutical products and medicines, and I would urge the Commission to develop a strategy on this. When it comes to the travel and quarantine rules there, we need greater European coordination. Thank you.
Grazzi. Issa jmiss lil Sara.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah does a minute and a half.
Thank you, President. And President, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, Madam Secretary of State, 3 points. How is the post-immunization and post-infection immunity being evaluated? We need to understand if with the vaccine we are protecting people and for how long. My question would be, when will we have this information available? And if we find out that we're going to need to have a repeat of the vaccination every year, what is the Commission doing to prepare for a situation in which there would be a need for additional vaccines so that member states can vaccinate their citizens repeatedly to guarantee immunity? Now, last month, you presented an ambitious plan to vaccinate 70% of the adult population by summer. Considering the scarcity in production on the pharma side that has already been mentioned, what measures will you take to meet this goal, or will you revise the objective to align it with the actual production capacity as it exists now? Now, I will conclude with an appeal to citizens. The European Union has made progress in a structured and strong way in its vaccine distribution campaign. And in fact, through the European Vaccination Information Portal, it states the entire process in the member states. And I'd like to make sure that the Council and Commission make sure that this information of the existence of this platform gets to citizens, for citizens, and for a veritable European health union.
Thank you, Jan Huytema.
We can't hear the speaker.
There is no sound for the speaker. Okay, you can start over.
Okay. Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, there are 400 or 500 elements in a vaccine, but of course, a great demand, there's not enough raw materials. And what is the Commission doing to prepare itself for this situation? And I don't think this is a new situation. Even before the pandemic, it was clear that supply security for raw materials for pharmaceuticals was not always existent, and this has very severe impacts. Right now, the Commission hasn't made a concrete proposal as to deal with this. For example, a pharmaceutical strategy in order to ensure the supply of raw materials. Are we going to get it now?
Grazie.
Thank you, Ville Niinistö. 1 minute.
Madam President, I have spoken with a lot of young people in Europe, and they have a strong message to deliver. The continuing corona crisis is a huge strain to the health of the youth of Europe. I'm not just worried about the health effects to the elderly and the risk groups, but of the effect that 1 year or even 2 years of continued corona crisis carry to the mental health of the youth. For young people forming their whole future, that is a long time without proper chances for social contacts and learning. If there is a generation growing without a chance to pursue their dreams and visions, it affects our whole youth future. It is a Europe without dreams and visions. And this crisis affects the youth of the whole world. It is not just limited to Europe. So therefore, I urge the Commission to do its utmost to ramp up the vaccine production in Europe and globally. There needs to be compulsory licensing of the vaccines to speed up production. We need all hands on deck. There needs to be carrots and sticks to enforce public interest about the interest of a few private vaccine companies. Vaccination has yet to start in the poorest countries, so there needs to be a global strategy here. I urge you to action.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker, Mr. Buxade Villalba, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I'm so surprised by the comments by the President of the Commission. They consistently reiterate the same thing, and that it was good to act as they did. That it's important to keep the ship moving, and that perhaps that we should all sink together rather than try to save some. Now, with European member states, if we look at the fiasco of the vaccination campaign, perhaps they will think that this was correct. But if we have to consider that it's important perhaps for the person who's in charge to stop playing music, with perhaps face the music. Now, when we look at what has happened, we can see that there have been mistakes, and we look at the vaccine from China shouldn't be used. And we've seen the same struggle is taking place in Spain amongst all of the various parties in the central government. No one wants to accept the responsibility of what is happening. And if we have to really take dignity and to...
Thank you. Esteban Gonzalez Pons, a minute and a half.
Thank you very much. If it hadn't been for the mass purchase of vaccines on the part of the Commission, very many member states of the European Union, including mine, for example, because of a lack of political clout and budget, these member states would not have started receiving vaccines until Germany and France had finished their vaccine campaigns, maybe after the summer. The European decision to centralise the purchase of vaccines has spared us a shameful race to the top over the price, and spared us the drama of not having anything to be able to protect millions of Europeans in our countries. When it came to criticising the frugal member states for dragging their heels over the recovery fund, then there were voices highlighting the fact that there was a lack of solidarity. Now, however, when it comes to trying to break up the purchasing consortium, where the north of the European Union wouldn't have had problems with deliveries, but the south, yes, we don't hear the same kind of gratitude and thanks being expressed to Mrs. von der Leyen as President of the Commission, just the same selfishness, north and south. A secondary effect of COVID is nationalism. We've got Orban buying the Russian vaccines, going it alone. Germany is intending to buy 600 million doses of vaccine outside of the Commission. Russia is trying to divide us by offering Sputnik to some member states or not, and others not. The United Kingdom has turned the vaccination campaign into the first post-Brexit political success, and Serbia is vaccinating more quickly than the European Union average thanks to the Chinese vaccines. And this is the worst moment to show a lack of unity. European solidarity is working. Can only work on our continent without borders, and obviously if not everybody is vaccinated.
Thank you very much. Sandor and I next. 1 minute.
Madam President, dear members, let's think back as the pandemic began. Many member states, many countries actually decided that they wanted to take action and use and make sure that they wanted to get supplies very quickly. And Hungary didn't do this very well. Rather, we asked for ventilators from China, and we received so many ventilators that it would have been enough for a much larger country. And I'm very happy for that reason that the procurement of vaccines and the production of vaccines has been organized in a centralized fashion. It's not a simple task at all, because, of course, we need vaccines for 500 million people. And certification and authorization procedures for the vaccines are, in fact, paid for by EU citizens. Nonetheless, this process is more transparent than the kind of process if we had them carried out in Hungary, where the Russian...
1 minute, Hilde Woutmans.
Mevrouw de commissievoorzitter.
President of the Commission. We do not need words, we need action. This is what we are expecting if we are to meet our mark of 70% of the population vaccinated by this summer. And the producers around the world have to do just that. If we look at the UK, US, Israel, they're all swifter than we are. And in Europe, we are currently receiving a lot of criticism. Now, you say very well, this is a marathon and not a sprint. But for Europe, the time has come to make sure that we sprint ahead. We have to accelerate to make sure that we scale up our production capacity, to make sure that we have scrutiny over our contracts and scrutiny over distribution, rebalance things. It's time for Europe to intervene. It is absolutely shameful, and it would be shameful if it were to be the Sputnik vaccine to save us. We'll need a European strategy. There is no other way. But we have to be transparent along the way because people want to understand what is.
Thank you. Sarah Mathia for 1 minute.
Beste commissievoorzitter, samenwerking is de kracht van de...
Commission President, working together, cooperation, that's the strength of the European Union. Now, only together can we ensure that all European citizens have the best and safest vaccination. And that's why I wish that all the contracts concluded by the Commission could be published, because then I think that would increase the acceptability of the vaccine among our citizens. But we're not an island. We can only really benefit when the whole world is vaccinated. So I think patents are really blocking widespread vaccination production. So, Madam President, you keep referring to the COVAX initiative. That's actually just a very small part of it. It's coming much too late. That's why right now what we have to do is look at the intellectual property rights and abolish those kinds of patents at the WTO.
Is I miss.
Thank you. A minute and a half. Paolo Rango, please.